So, the African novel. In this course, the African novel, ELS 211, we will study novels of African origin, novels by African writers, novels about Africa, and the issues depicted and portrayed in those novels. That's how simple the course is. But there is a sacrifice to be made. And what is the sacrifice? The sacrifice is that you have to read. Because, in the first place, novels are extended narratives. By that we know we mean that it has volume. Novels have volume. It's not like drama. Okay? That's why we call them extended narratives. Hardly will you come across a slim novel. Novels are usually plumpy. Okay? But then, we expect you to read as many as you can in order to be prepared for the examination. So, despite the fact that the scope of the course is simple and straightforward, we are studying novels from Africa, novels about Africa, novels by Africans. But you need to make a commitment to read each and every one of them. That's how it works. As I've said, we are two on the course, my humble self. And Dr. Kufrakman. Now, this is how we will proceed. There are many novels to read. In the Department of English, we read. And we read a lot. There's no doubt about that. You cannot get around that. Cannot circumvent reading, the actual reading text. So if you're going to be a successful student in the department, you need to be a lover of books. You need to love reading. You need to fall in love with reading. Reading for you should be a game, not a task. It should be an enjoyable activity. It should be a mood of entertainment. All right? You must not have phobia for books. After all, these books are entertaining because they tell stories, interesting stories about humanity. So you ought to enjoy them. And so you read these novels because now you answer 4 questions in exams. You need to read at least 8 novels to prepare yourself for exam. But because you're also preparing yourself for life, then you need to read more than that. The 8 is just for exams. Perhaps 2 questions, 2 novels to a question. Okay? Two novels to a question. So you read 8. But then there are many other novels on the outline that you're expected to read for your own good, for the expansion of your mind. You need to read them. And then we also expect you to be a formidable critic of the novel. Not only reading, but you also test your ability to interpret, criticize, evaluate any novel given to you without necessarily looking for comments that other people have already written about that work. You can do it on your own. It can be done. It's possible. Because you're going to be told. And so we'll test that. We'll test that ability. And so by next week, I'll give you the novel that you read and which you use to write a test on the course. Towards the end of the course, or when we have taught that particular topic. Meaning that this is the beginning of the semester, you have all the time in the world to pick up the novel, read, and prepare yourself for the great test, which will test your ability to interpret the novel based on certain elements. So that will go for 15 marks. And I've always said, all marks are important because at the end of the day, the difference between a pass grade and a fail grade might just be just a few marks that you didn't want to earn, or that you were too lazy to earn. Or the difference between a B grade and an A grade is just that extra effort that you put in the studies or answering the question. So you need to do all that you can in your power to pass each course once and for all. Then you move on to the next, because it is not good for courses to follow you as you're moving towards final year. Okay? It will add to your stress. It will add to your stress level. Your stress level will be high. Okay? And you'll be angry at everyone for no reason. Okay? And you will not be able to enjoy school again. Anytime you want to smile, you remember your repeat courses that are waiting for you. So why not concentrate and study this course and pass it once and for all and move on? The next ones, we call it one step at a time. As it is done. And the other lecturer will also give the CA. That will also be for 15 marks. That means the two will be 30. So you must do the two CS to stand a chance of passing. Because you don't know what you will score in this one or you score in the other one. But whatever you score, when the two are put together, it makes sense, or it makes a little sense. Okay? Than for you to do one and ignore one. And then you have to prepare for exams, which is 70 marks. So there's no way you do all these things and you still fail. And you need to develop your skills for answering questions in the Department of English. And by that we mean that you need to know what the question is all about. You need to dwell on the essence of the question. You need to refer to the relevant texts. And you need to write in English. You need to write in a language that we understand. And you need to write exhaustively. You don't just scribble a few lines and say that you've answered the question. No. Please take note of that. There's no other magic than all these things I've said. Okay? And I'm saying this because I don't want to see failures. I want to see people pass their courses. Okay? Alright, so let us begin. We'll begin with the general introduction to the course. And we'll look at the social, cultural, and historical background to the African novel. The social, cultural, and historical background to the African novel. So we'll begin with the question. And the question is, do we have an African novel? Is the existence of the African novel possible? Do we have an authentic African novel? Do we have a novel that we can actually call African? Okay? So that question seems ridiculous. You might just ask, why is a lecturer asking such a ridiculous question? Why not? We have the African novel. Okay? But you must understand that some decades ago, it was difficult to convince anyone that there was a genre called the African novel. This is because the Eurocentric critics did not believe in the existence of the African novel. The Eurocentric critics. By Eurocentric critics, we mean Western scholars interested in criticizing the novel. Europeans, British scholars did not believe that we had what could be termed the African novel. Okay? This is because they saw what our writers wrote as an extension of the English novel or the European novel, owing to the colonial encounter, the fallout of the colonial encounter on cultural production. Remember, most of my classes are on YouTube, so you visit my YouTube channel, Ayo Etum. You just search my name on YouTube, you come across my channel, you can look through the videos that I have made or the lessons I've recorded and listen to them. All right? Free of charge, we have data. But remember to subscribe. Okay? Because the subscription is free. Just click on the subscription button. It's free. Nobody will charge you. And second about it, will you subscribe? Okay. So, owing to the colonial incident, owing to the colonial encounter, the Eurocentric critics doubted the existence of the African novel. They said that we did not have our own authentic novel, that the African novel was an extension of the British, or the English, the European novel. So, the fact that the African novel is flourishing today, does not mean that it did not have its moment of struggles. The fact that the African novel is flourishing today does not mean that it did not have its moment of what? Struggle. There was a time the African novel struggled for recognition, struggled to be recognized. Okay? So I'm going to list some of the Eurocentric critics who did not believe in the existence of the authentic African novel. We have Adrian Roscoe. We have John Covey. We have Charles Lasson. And others. Adrian Roscoe, John Covey, Charles Lasson, and others claimed that the authentic African novel did not exist. They claimed that the African novel was a hybrid. They claimed that the African novel was what? A hybrid. A combination of different forms of the novel. They gave reasons for their claims. They gave reasons for their claims. They criticized the African novel as being oral. They criticized the African novel as being what? Oral. Being oral. Being monothematic. Being oral. Being monothematic. Being monostructural. Monostructural. They criticized the African novel of being mimetic. They criticized the African novel of being a hybrid. Okay? These are difficult terms for simple things. The African novel is a hybrid because it is a mix of different things, of different sources, of different materials, different traditions. Some African, some European, some English, some classical, some Greek, some Roman. That's hybrid. Hybrid is if the organism has mixed genes. It's not pure. Okay? So we also have what we call cultural hybridity, where the individual is composed of different cultures. Like most of you seated here, you are cultural hybrid. Okay? Monothematic, that the African novel only has one theme. Okay? The African novel is preoccupied with one theme, perhaps colonialism. Okay? Monostructural, the African novel only has a particular structure. The African novel only has one structure. Okay? Maybe chronological structure. One pattern of narrative. That the African novel is mimetic. That means it copies or apes the West, right? Apes the West. African novel copies or apes, okay, the West. The two terms are similar, but you tend to impress more if you use apes, right? We get it? Good. Mimetic. It imitates. So these were the reasons advanced by the Eurocentric critics like Charles Larson, John Povey, to justify the assertion that the African novel did not exist. For instance, Monet Benzide, in a 2015 article, Monet Benzide, in a 2015 article, Monet Benzide, in a 2015 article entitled African Literature Still in the Dark. African Literature Still in the Dark. African literature still in the dark. Still in the dark. So the word dark evokes imagery of trial and tribulation, answering questions, being called to question, being interrogated, being challenged. It's a court register. So African literature still on trial. African literature still in the dark. So the article is entitled African Literature Still in the Dark, a deconstructive strategy for Eurocentric hegemony. A deconstructive strategy for Eurocentric hegemony. In this article, Zid points to the statement made by Charles Larson about Amos Titula's palm wine drinker. Points to the statement made by Charles Larson about Amos Titula's the palm wine drinker. He says that the novel Palm Wine Drinker lacks logic, rationality, and consistency. Charles Larson says that the novel The Palm Wine Drinker lacks logic, rationality, and what? Consistency. And then uses this particular instance to generalize about the African novel. That the Palm Wine Drinker lacks logic, rationality, and what? Consistency. And then he uses this to generalize about the African novel. So it would just be like, just as Amos Itola's Palm Wine Drinker lacks logic, rationality, and consistency, this is the same situation with all other African novels. The Eurocentric critics also criticized African literature for promoting superstition and magic. The Eurocentric critics also criticized African literature for promoting superstition and magic. For dwelling on unrealistic issues. Without talking about universal and human concerns. Without talking about universal and human concerns. Without talking about universal and human concerns. In other words, they were criticizing our authors as being technically inadequate. In other words, they were criticizing our authors for being what? For being artistically inadequate. For lacking the right mastery for the novel. It's like they were saying, you are not enough. You don't have what it takes. This novel of the thing is not your thing. You can't possibly do this. You can't beat us. The novel is our game. It's not yours. So don't try. Perhaps the greatest of the charges. Remember, the word charges are also drawn from court as court imagery. This of the charges was in the area of language. The greatest of the charges was in the area of language. Because most African novels were written in the European languages, say English, say French, say Portuguese, say German. The Eurocentric critics claimed that these novels were not African, going by the language criterion, because most African novels were written in European languages like English, like French, like Portuguese, like German, like Spanish. So the Eurocentric critics said that you cannot call them African novels. You cannot call them African novels. That they should be called English novels or European novels, depending on the language that the novel was written in. So you cannot write in English and claim that the novel is African. Why not write in your own language? That's the argument. Why not write in your own language? You write in my language, I claim the novel as mine. If you want the novel to be yours, write in your language. That's what the European critics were saying. That we did not have authentic African novels because we wrote in English. So because we wrote in English, it should be English novel. That was the argument. But the question is, why did Africans write in English? Why did Africans write in Portuguese? Why did they write in Spanish? Because of the colonial encounter. Right? Because of what? The colonial encounter. The Africans wrote in English, wrote in European languages, because they had no other choice. They didn't have any other linguistic choice. Because during colonialism, the colonial masters forced them to learn English, forced them to learn to study and speak and write Spanish, German, and other European languages, depending on who their colonial masters were. Right? For instance, we in Nigeria, we were colonized by the British, so we speak English. We don't speak English better than the British. Right? You even speak English better than the British. And you don't know your indigenous languages. Not even a low. Not even a low in your indigenous language. Right? Not even a low. So African writers had to stand up and defend the existence of the African novel. At a point, African writers and critics had to wake up and challenge the Eurocentric critics. They provided evidence that challenged the assumptions and claims of the Eurocentric critics on the African novel. It was a serious fight. It was a difficult fight. It was what we call the war of words, right? The war of words. It was the war of the intellect, war of the mind, war of words, claims and counterclaims, charges and countercharges. So these African critics were Chinua Achebe, Lulu Thiongo, Abiola Irele, and Chinwezu, and others. Can you write them down? Those who challenged, among those who challenged, the Eurocentric critics were Chinua Achebe. These are our heroes who made the African novel to be in existence today. So you must acknowledge them. Okay? Every generation of critics, have the battle. Every generation of critics has its own battle to fight. Chinua Achebe, Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Have you heard of him before? Abiola Irele. And Chinwezu Eto'o. Chinwezu Eto'o. Eto'o means and others. It's Latin for and others, right? Eto'o means and others. Chinwezu Eto'o. Like saying Chinwezu and the gang. Okay? That's the way some Gen Z will understand Eto'o. You tell them Eto'o, they don't understand. Just say, what I mean is Chinwezu and the gang. Right? Or Chinwezu and Co. Right? Chinwezu and Co. So Achebe, for instance, defended the use of English by African writers to write their creative works. Achebe, for instance, defended the use of English by African writers in writing their creative works. And maintained that the choice of English does not in any way make the work not to be African. And maintained that the choice of English does not in any way make the work not to be an African work. Achebe gave reasons why African writers had to use English in writing their works. And then said that the fact that African writers resorted to the use of English language at the moment of writing their creative work does not in any way make the work not to be an African work. He said that the Africans had no choice. They were left with no other linguistic choice but the Europeans who forced them to learn their languages. It was the only language they could use with mastery, with communicative mastery. Imagine someone coming and then forcing you to learn their own language, abandoning your own language and making you learn theirs. When you want to communicate, which language are you going to use? There. But these are the same people who now say that because you're writing in their language, your creative work should be theirs, not yours, and should be judged by their own critical standards, and not your own critical standards. So you need to pay attention to these arguments because sometimes you might be asked to defend the existence of African literature or the African novel in general or in particular. And you need to know the arguments. For instance, if someone says the African novel is oral, is preoccupied with orality, what will you say? You say that speech precedes writing. That's what you say. Speech precedes writing. That all peoples of the earth did not start out with the writing skills. Literature began as what? Oral. First of all, and oral literature is the substance of modern literature. which is written. It's the soul. Oral literature is the soul of modern literature. And modern literature will mean written literature. That's how you argue. Because you see, in literature and in criticism, you are empowered with ideas to defend your stance. You don't have to succumb to whatever someone comes to tell you. You should be armed enough to also defend yourself when the charges come. In a work entitled Morning Yet on Creation Day, in a work entitled Morning Yet on Creation Day, in a publication entitled Morning Yet on Creation Day, Achebe debunked the claims of the Eurocentric critics on the language question, the language issue. Morning Yet on Creation Day. Okay, so Achebe justifies the use of English by African writers and goes on to say that he has been able to change the English that he uses in his work to the extent that it is different from the English that was brought by the colonial masters. He has been able to modify the language to shoulder the cultural sensibilities of the environment. So the English that Achebe uses in his work is not Queen's English, it's not King's English, all right? It is the English that understands the sensibilities of the African environment. It's the type of English that is sensitive to the cultural ethos of the African environment. So they cannot claim it to be that English. It is not that English, it is our English. All right? So you see that Achebe is not using English in his work, he uses Englishes in his work. And you must know the difference. You must know the difference. Achebe does not use English in his work. Achebe uses Englishes in his work. English is for the British. English is our own. We have been able to domesticate, nativize the language so that it speaks the language of our culture. And so it's our language now. It doesn't belong. Because sometimes we speak our English to the British people, they don't understand. Right? We speak our English to the British, they don't understand. Some of you speak to the British person till tomorrow. The person will say, pardon? Pardon? All right? Because it's not their language. You are speaking your own language, your own English. Not even to talk about pidgin. I want pidgin. So this means that in deploying the English language In their creative works, the African writer practices abrogation and appropriation. In deploying the English language in their creative works, the African writer practices what? Abrogation and what? Appropriation. Abrogation and appropriation. In deploying English in writing their works, the African writer practices abrogation and appropriation. Abrogation and appropriation are important terms in understanding how language works in post-colonial texts. If you want to discuss the utilization of language in the post-colonial text, you must come to terms with abrogation and appropriation. The two terms are related. The two terms are related. Abrogation refers to a deliberate and a conscious attempt by the post-colonial writer to subvert the rules of standard usage of the colonizer's language. Abrogation refers to a deliberate and a conscious attempt by the post-colonial writer to do what? To subvert, ignore the standard rules in using the colonizer's language. Remember that the English language has rules, all right? So that you can be grammatically correct, so that somebody will not laugh at you when you speak, all right? But here, the post-colonial writer comes in and what? Suppresses the rules, ignores the rules, okay? Because that helps him to communicate his thoughts better, perfectly. So the rules do not get in the way of the post-colonial writer. That is what we call abrogation, the deliberate and the conscious attempt by the post-colonial writer to subvert or ignore the standard usage of the colonizer's language. That's abrogation. He knows the rules. He was taught the rules, but he deliberately chooses not to obey them. And you come across these things in the post-colonial text all the time. Okay? He ignores the standard usage of the language for communicative purposes. He doesn't want to write like the British. That's abrogation. Now let's talk about appropriation. Appropriation refers to the act of conditioning the language, altering the language, modifying the language, so as to suit the communicative purpose of the post-colonial writer, even if that conditioning ignores the standard usage of the language. Appropriation means modifying the language, changing the language, altering the language to suit the communicative purpose of the post-colonial writer, even if that means ignoring the rules, the standard rules of the language. It means, appropriation means making the language work for the post-colonial writer in post-colonial situations, post-colonial texts. So it is abrogation and appropriation that operate in most post-colonial texts. Because our writers do not write like the British, do not write like the Europeans. They use, Achebe, for instance, makes use of abrogation and what? Appropriation. Everybody say abrogation and appropriation. Abrogation and appropriation. Good. Very good. So abrogation and appropriation can manifest in transliteration. Can manifest in what? Transliteration. And manifest in transliteration. Abrogation and appropriation can manifest in what? Transliteration. Transliteration has affinity with translation. Transliteration has what? Affinity with translation. That means they are related. Except that transliteration means the direct transfer of images. Direct transfer of images. Syntax. Lexis. From one language to another. Direct transfer of images, of syntax, of lexis from one domain to another domain, from one language to another language, or from the source language to the target language. That's why at the average stage of learning, at the early stage of learning, the second language, the post-colonial subjects, or if you like, you can call them the colonial subjects, who speak English, make use of transliteration. African writers also make use of transliteration. Because when you tell somebody, I'm coming, oh, but you're going. Okay? All right? Wait for me. I'm coming. Because that's how you say it in your indigenous language. And bring it into English. You don't know that the British do not say it like that. Okay? That's transliteration. Okay? Bushmeat. Bushmeat is transliteration. Right? In your indigenous language. In Chebe's Things Fall Apart, you come across an expression like iron horse. Okay? So that expression when you read Things Fall Apart? Iron horse. Okay? That's transliteration. Iron horse. It is translation. It is lifted like that. The indigenous language. The person doesn't care how it is called in English. It's not his concern. Right? Just lift it like that into the English language. Okay? Because it's iron horse. It's not bicycle. Doesn't care whether it is bicycle or what. It's iron horse. This particular horse is made of iron. You get it? That's how most of you speak English. Alright? Most of you speak English like Chubike. English like Chubike. That's because of your post-colonial situation. and we perfectly understand, right? We perfectly sympathize. I understand your post-colonial situation in the usage of English. Okay? So imagine asking Chibuike to pronounce a word like this. Chibuike, pronounce this word. Service. Another way that abrogation and appropriation manifest in the post-colonial text or in the post-colonial novel, in an African novel, because the African novel is the post-colonial novel, right? Everything that comes as a result of the colonial encounter is post-colonial. I hope you get it. Good. Is glossing. Glossing is another way that abrogation and appropriation manifests in the post-colonial novel, the post-colonial text, in the African novel. Glossing. Okay? Another way is untranslatable language. Untranslatable language. We call it untranslatability. The post-colonial text, the language of the post-colonial text is marked by glossing and untranslatable language. Somebody say, what is glossing? Somebody should ask, what is glossing?
What is glossing?
Okay? So you know the post-colonial writer has the penchant to deploy indigenous words and expressions in his or her work. When there is a creative way of interpreting the indigenous expressions in the work, that is glossing. When there is a creative way of translating or interpreting that indigenous expression in the work, that's what glossing is. It should take your mind to the word gloss. To take your mind to glossing should take your mind to gloss and glossary. All right. In some books, you usually have glossary at the end of the text, where some important words are explained or interpreted. So it's from there that we have gloss and then glossing in the post-colonial text. But glossing in the post-colonial text does not happen like glossary. It happens within the text, within the meta language of fiction, within the narrative language of fiction. As the writer is telling the story, he or she uses an indigenous word or expression and still uses the language of narrative to interpret that word for us. Okay? For instance, if the writer says, Egbo the masquerade arrived and the children ran away. Egbo the masquerade arrived and the children ran away. He has just used glossing. Because Egbo and the masquerade are one and the same thing. You get it? So that's glossing. You come across it all the time in the post-colonial text, but you might not know that that's glossing. Right? So if I say now, you know.
Now I know.
Good. And then, untranslatable language is when the writer refuses to interpret the indigenous word and expression. He deliberately refused to translate. Maybe to exclude the white man or to punish the colonial masters who read the work. All right? That's what we call untranslatable language. He has refused to translate it. Okay? Or has found a way not to translate it. So when the indigenous word or expression is not translated in a creative way in the work, then that's what untranslatable language. When it is creatively interpreted or translated, that's what glossy. Beautiful, beautiful. Let's just talk about how Ngugi wa Thiong'o reacted to the language question. Let's talk about how Ngugi wa Thiong'o reacted to the language question. Ngugi wa Thiong'o. It's a Kenyan writer. Where's Chinua Achebe from? Ngugi wa Thiong'o believes that we should not write in English. That we should rather write in our indigenous languages. Ngugi wa Thiong'o says we should not write in English. We should rather write in our indigenous languages. He even changed his name. He even changed his name as a reaction when a white person told him that even his name suggested his love for English culture. He changed the name. He got angry and changed the name. And stopped writing in English. And chose to write in Piguyu. Piguyu. Because he believes that language has an impactful influence on the human mind. You believe that language has an impactful influence on the human mind. And that one of the ways that colonialism entrenched itself was through language. One of the ways that colonialism entrenched itself was through language. The colonial master had to make us speak their language first. And through that language, they were able to transfer their culture. Language is a vehicle for transfer of culture. Language is a vehicle for cultural influence. Once you speak an individual's language, you imbibe that person's culture. So, Ngugi first of all writes his work in Giguyu before they could be translated into English. So his view is extreme. He completely rejects the European language or European languages. But Achebe thinks that we can still use the English, but in ways that make the English our own language. So that's a debatable topic there. Whether you want to go with Luiwafengo or you want to go with Achebe. So Abiola Irele in many essay attempted to justify the existence of the African novel by tracing its roots to antiquity. By tracing its roots to antiquity. By tracing the roots of the African novel to what? Antiquity. By antiquity, we mean what? Classical times. By antiquity, we mean what? We mean classical times. Okay? One of those essays is entitled Introduction, Perspectives on the African Novel. Introduction, Perspectives on the African Novel. One of those essays is entitled, one of the essays by Abiola Irele on the African novel is entitled what? Introduction, Perspectives on the African Novel. So Irele's introduction, Perspectives on the African Novel, was published in 2009, available online 2010. And in the work, Irele asserts that African writing, African literature, African novel dates back to antiquity. Dates back to antiquity. He uses two works to illustrate this, and they are The Golden Ass by Epiles and Ethiopica by Heliodorus. He uses two works to illustrate that African writing dates back to antiquity, and these works are The Golden Ass by Epiles and Ethiopica by Heliodorus. Okay, so we'll stop there. When we come back, you remind us to start from with our discussion on The Golden Ass and Ethiopica.